Virgin at 18, she was the target of public humiliation at the altar, betrayed in front of everyone by the person she trusted the most. As she fell in tears and despair, a mysterious millionaire crossed the hall in absolute silence. Without saying a word, he rescued her, and what seemed like pity concealed a plan that no one could have imagined. What he did next became headline news and forever changed the destiny of the one everyone thought had been destroyed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The March sun beat strongly against the windows of the Chicago church when Emily adjusted her veil for the last time. The mirror reflected a 28-year-old woman, radiant in her French lace dress, her brown hair pinned in an elegant bun that she had rehearsed dozens of times. Her green eyes sparkled with the expectation of finally beginning her life with Jason, the man she had met in business school and had been dating for 4 years. The bridesmaids whispered nervously around her, arranging the flowers in her bouquet and checking that everything was perfect. Emily took a deep breath, feeling her heart racing. In a few minutes, she would walk down the central aisle of the packed church, where 300 guests waited to witness the beginning of her new life. She had worked so hard for this moment. She had saved every penny of her salary as a librarian to make her dream wedding come true. The music began to play outside. It was time. Emily held her father's arm, a simple man who worked as an accountant at a family business, and took her first step toward the double doors of the church. When they opened, a wave of strange murmurs greeted her. They weren't the admiring whispers she had expected, but something different, unsettling. Her eyes scanned the altar but couldn't find Jason. The priest was there, visibly embarrassed, but the groom wasn't in his place. Emily continued walking, confused, until a figure emerged from the first rows. It was Jason, but he wasn't wearing his tuxedo. He was in casual clothes and wore an expression on his face that she had never seen before. Next to him, a woman stood up. Emily recognized her immediately. It was Megan, her best friend since adolescence, the same one who had been chosen as her maid of honor. Megan was clearly pregnant, her prominent belly impossible to ignore. Emily's world began to crumble when Jason approached, not to greet her but to hand her an envelope. The entire church had gone silent. Emily, with trembling hands, opened the letter. The words danced before her eyes, but she managed to read enough to understand the betrayal. Jason confessed his relationship with Megan, revealed that the baby was his, and that he had decided on that Saturday morning that he could no longer pretend to love Emily. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness that sounded empty and cruel. The murmurs transformed into open conversations. Emily heard fragments of malicious comments, saw people taking photographs with their cell phones, recording videos of her humiliation. Some guests laughed discreetly, others shook their heads in false compassion. She was alone at the altar, in the dress that had cost 3 months' salary, holding a bouquet that suddenly felt as heavy as lead. The tears began to fall, smudging her carefully applied makeup. Emily looked at her father, who was pale and clearly didn't know how to react. She looked at her mother, who was crying in the front row. She looked at the guests, who now watched her as if she were a spectacle of entertainment. The humiliation was total and public. That's when she saw him. A tall man with dark hair and penetrating gaze calmly rose from one of the middle rows. Emily knew him vaguely. He frequented the library where she volunteered on Saturdays, always choosing books on history and classic literature. They had never exchanged more than a few polite words, but she had always noticed the silent elegance with which he moved between the shelves. The man walked with firm steps down the central aisle, ignoring the curious glances of the guests. His clothes were impeccable, a dark suit that denoted quality and refinement. Emily knew he was someone important in the business world, had heard comments about his influence in the city, but had never paid much attention. When he reached her, he didn't say a word. He simply took off his jacket and placed it over Emily's trembling shoulders, covering the dress that now seemed like a cruel costume. His gesture was so natural and respectful that she felt protected for the first time since the church doors had opened. He offered his arm. Emily, still in shock, accepted the support. Together they walked back down the aisle, passing the same people who moments before had witnessed her joy and now witnessed her ruin. But this time, something had changed. His presence beside her created an invisible barrier against the gossip and malicious glances. Outside the church, he led her to a black car parked on the sidewalk. Emily got in without questioning, still holding the bouquet that now seemed purposeless. The driver, a discreet middle-aged man, drove in silence through the streets of Chicago while she tried to process what had happened. Throughout the journey, he didn't ask questions or offer empty words of consolation. He just remained by her side, a solid presence amid the emotional chaos she was experiencing. Emily looked out the window, seeing the city pass by like a blur, and wondered where they were going and why this man, practically a stranger, had put himself in such an embarrassing situation to help her. The car stopped in front of an imposing mansion in an upscale neighborhood of the city. Emily had passed through this area a few times, but had never imagined that she knew someone who lived there. The house was an example of contemporary architecture, with clean lines and perfectly maintained gardens. Everything there breathed serenity and good taste. He helped her out of the car and led her to the entrance. A discreet housekeeper received them at the door, clearly instructed about the situation. Emily was taken to an elegant room on the second floor, where she found comfortable clothes in her size laid out on the bed. There was a bath prepared, and fluffy towels waiting for her. Finally alone, Emily allowed herself to cry. She cried for the humiliation, for Jason's betrayal, for the loss of her best friend, for the shattered dreams. She cried until she had no more tears, until her exhausted body begged for rest. When she finally stood up, she removed the wedding dress and left it lying on the floor like a symbol of everything she had lost that day. After the bath, she put on the clothes that had been left for her and went downstairs. She found him in the library, a cozy environment with shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with carefully organized books. He was reading, but raised his eyes when she entered. It was then that he spoke for the first time since he had rescued her from the church. His voice was deep and calm, conveying a security that she hadn't felt in a long time. He offered her something that she had never expected, a proposal that could completely change the course of her shattered life. Michael Alden formally introduced himself for the first time, although Emily already knew who he was. At 42, he was the CEO of one of the largest financial consulting companies in the country, heir to a fortune built over 3 generations. But there was something in his dark eyes that suggested a depth that went beyond business success, a melancholy that he carried like a constant shadow. He served tea and sat in a leather armchair, maintaining a respectful distance. Emily, still wearing the borrowed clothes, felt small in that sumptuous environment, but something in his posture reassured her. There was no condescension in his gaze, only a silent understanding that she hadn't expected to find. The proposal that Michael presented was unusual. He explained that his social life had become a burden in recent years: charity events, diplomatic dinners, business meetings that extended into social occasions. All of this required the presence of a companion. His previous attempts to attend alone had generated unnecessary speculation about his personal life, interfering with his business. Emily listened attentively as he outlined the terms of the agreement. She would accompany him for 3 months to social events, presenting herself as his partner. In exchange, he would provide housing, clothes appropriate for the occasions, and a substantial amount that would allow her to restart her life after the established period. Most importantly, he would use his influence to help her find a better job, away from the gossip and curious glances that would certainly follow her at her old job. Emily's first reaction was mistrust. Why would such a powerful and attractive man need such an arrangement? Michael seemed to read her thoughts and explained, with an honesty that surprised her, that he had lost the ability to trust in genuine relationships. Women approached him interested in his money and status. Men sought business opportunities. He preferred the transparency of a professional agreement to the farce of a self-interested romance. Emily asked for time to think. Michael nodded and showed her the room where she would stay for as long as necessary, even if she decided to refuse the proposal. It was an elegant environment, with a view of the garden, a personal library, and everything she might need to recover from the recent trauma. That night, alone in the room, Emily reflected on her situation. She had nowhere to go. She had lived with Jason for 2 years, and her single apartment had been rented out. Her savings had been spent on the wedding that hadn't happened. Worse still, she knew that the public humiliation would follow her for a long time. Michael's proposal offered not only a refuge, but an opportunity to rebuild her life with dignity. The next morning, Emily accepted the proposal. Michael received her decision with a respectful nod and immediately set in motion an operation that revealed his business efficiency. A personal stylist was hired to renew Emily's wardrobe, a hairdresser came to the house to take care of her hair, and a driver was assigned to be always at her disposal. The first event would be in a week, a benefit cocktail party to raise funds for a foundation supporting underprivileged children. Emily felt her stomach tighten at the thought of facing Chicago society again, but Michael reassured her, explaining that most of those present would be business people and diplomats, not necessarily people who had witnessed her humiliation. During the week of preparation, Emily began to observe Michael more carefully. He worked long hours in his home office, often making calls abroad due to time zone differences. His dedication to work seemed a form of escape, a way to avoid moments of silence where unwanted thoughts might arise. Emily also noticed that he avoided certain rooms in the house. There was a hallway on the second floor that he never walked down, a door that was always closed before which he slowed his pace, as if carrying an invisible weight. When she discreetly asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, about that part of the house, the woman quickly changed the subject. But Emily noticed a flash of sadness in her eyes. As the first event approached, Emily felt increasingly nervous. Michael, noticing her anxiety, suggested that they do some rehearsals. They practiced social conversations, he explained the etiquette protocols for diplomatic events, and shared information about the main personalities who would be present. During these rehearsals, Emily discovered that Michael was a cultured and interesting man. He knew about art, literature, classical music, and history. His observations on the books she had read were intelligent and insightful. Gradually, she began to feel more comfortable in his presence, and the conversations flowed naturally. The night before the event, Emily tried on the dress that had been chosen for the occasion. It was an elegant model in navy blue, which enhanced her green eyes and gave her a sophistication she didn't know she possessed. When she came down the stairs to show the result to Michael, she saw something in his gaze that she couldn't interpret, a mixture of approval and something deeper, more personal. The day of the event arrived. Emily woke up with butterflies in her stomach, but determined to fulfill her part of the agreement. Michael had been kind and respectful throughout the week, treating her as a business partner and not as a vulnerable woman he had rescued from a humiliating situation. In the car on the way to the hotel where the event would take place, Michael gave her the final instructions. He would be introduced as a potential investor in educational projects, she as a children's literature consultant who worked with public libraries. The version was close to the truth, but elevated her professional status to something more consistent with the environment in which they would circulate. When they arrived at the hotel, Emily took a deep breath. The lights of the hall shone through the windows, and she could see the elegant silhouettes of the guests who had already arrived. Michael offered his arm, and she accepted it, feeling more secure with his solid presence beside her. They entered the hall together, and Emily immediately noticed the curious glances directed at them. Michael was a known and respected figure, and his appearance with an unknown companion naturally aroused interest. But this time, Emily didn't feel exposed or vulnerable. Michael's arm under hers transmitted confidence, and she maintained an upright posture and a discreet smile. During the first hour, everything went perfectly. Michael introduced her to various business people and their wives, all showing genuine interest in her work with children's literature. Emily discovered that she could naturally talk about her projects at the library, and her passion for the subject showed through in her words, winning the sympathy of her interlocutors. That's when she saw him. On the other side of the hall, Jason was talking with a group of people, and at his side, Megan proudly displayed her pregnant belly. Emily felt the blood freeze in her veins, and her breathing became shallow. Michael, immediately noticing her change in mood, followed her gaze and understood the situation. Without saying a word, he led her to the balcony where she could breathe fresh air and regain her composure. Emily felt embarrassed by her reaction, but Michael reassured her, explaining that it was natural to feel shaken when seeing the people who had hurt her so deeply. When they returned to the hall, Emily was determined not to allow Jason and Megan's presence to ruin her night. She talked with more people, genuinely laughed at some jokes, and even shared some interesting stories about her work. Michael watched discreetly, apparently impressed with her ability to recover. The crucial moment came when Jason, noticing her presence, approached them. Emily felt her heart race but maintained her composure. Michael, sensing the tension, positioned himself slightly in front of her, like a discreet but effective shield. The conversation was brief and tense. Jason tried to apologize, but his words sounded empty and self-indulgent. Emily responded with an icy politeness, making it clear that there was nothing to be discussed between them. When Jason insisted, talking about the possibility of them talking in private, Emily responded in English, with a tone that cut any illusion of reconciliation. It was at that moment that Michael did something unexpected. He leaned in and kissed Emily softly, a gesture that seemed totally natural but left everyone present surprised. When they separated, Emily saw in Michael's eyes something she hadn't noticed before, an intensity that went beyond the representation they were making. The kiss had changed everything. During the following weeks, Emily felt a different tension in the air whenever she was in Michael's presence. He continued to be polite and respectful, but there were moments when their gazes met and remained connected for a few seconds longer than appropriate for a professional agreement. The social events followed one after another: a contemporary art exhibition, a charity dinner for a foundation supporting the elderly, a cocktail party for foreign diplomats. Emily had perfectly adapted to the role, and her presence alongside Michael no longer caused strangeness. On the contrary, they formed an elegant and harmonious couple, and Emily noticed that people genuinely enjoyed her company. At home, their conversations during dinners had become more intimate. Michael shared opinions on international politics, talked about his business projects, and even revealed some childhood memories. Emily, in turn, told him about her passion for literature, her dreams of writing someday, and her experiences working with children at the library. One night, after returning from a particularly formal event, Emily found Michael in the garden of the house. He was sitting on a stone bench, looking at the stars with a melancholic expression. She hesitated before approaching, but something in his posture made her sit beside him. It was then that Michael began to talk about Ethan, his son. His voice became softer, carrying a pain that he rarely allowed to show through. Ethan had been a brilliant boy, curious about everything, passionate about books and music. Michael had been a dedicated father, but also a demanding businessman, always trying to balance time between work and family. Emily listened in silence as Michael told her about the accident. Ethan was only 8 years old when a momentary distraction resulted in tragedy. Michael blamed himself deeply, as he had been the one taking care of the boy that day. Since then, he had closed himself off, dedicating himself exclusively to work as a way to escape the pain. The revelation explained a lot about Michael: his reluctance to form relationships, his obsessive dedication to work, the way he avoided certain rooms in the house. Emily felt her heart open to him in a way that she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't pity, but a deep understanding of someone who had also experienced loss. Michael then showed her Ethan's room, a space that had remained untouched for years. It was a cheerful environment, with shelves full of children's books, carefully organized toys, and drawings stuck to the walls. Emily saw a small piano in the corner and asked if Ethan played. With a sad smile, Michael told her that he had begun to teach his son to play. Ethan was talented and loved classical music. Michael went to the grand piano in the living room and played a simple melody, explaining that it was Ethan's favorite. Emily was moved to see this strong and successful man playing a lullaby with trembling fingers. The intimacy between them grew naturally after that night. There was no longer the formality of the first days, but a complicity that developed with each conversation. Michael began to seek Emily's opinion on work matters, and she felt valued for her intelligence and insight. Emily also began to help Michael with his philanthropic activities. She organized events at the library for the children served by the foundations he supported, created reading programs, and even wrote small stories for the boys and girls who participated in the projects. Michael observed her work with admiration, seeing in her a genuine dedication that he rarely found in his corporate world. It was during one of these charity events that Emily met Victoria Thompson, an elegant and sophisticated woman who approached her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Victoria had been Michael's partner in a business project years ago, and Emily soon realized that there was an unresolved history between them. Victoria was the type of woman who commanded attention wherever she went. Blonde, tall, impeccably dressed, and with a magnetic presence that attracted glances. She greeted Emily with an icy cordiality and immediately began to ask subtle questions about her relationship with Michael. During the conversation, Victoria planted seeds of doubt in Emily's mind. She commented on how Michael was a man difficult to truly know, how he had become cold and calculating after the loss of his son. She insinuated that all women who approached him ended up being pushed away when he tired of their company. Emily tried not to give importance to Victoria's comments, but the words kept echoing in her mind. She began to question if the feelings she had developed for Michael were reciprocated, or if she was deceiving herself about the nature of their relationship. The situation became complicated when Victoria began to appear more frequently at social events. She always found a way to approach Michael, reminding him of stories from the past and showing an intimacy that made Emily uncomfortable. Michael maintained his politeness, but Emily noticed that he became tenser when Victoria was present. One night, after a particularly tense dinner where Victoria had monopolized much of Michael's attention, Emily decided to confront him about the subject. She had drunk a little more wine than usual and felt brave enough to express her insecurities. The conversation began calmly, but soon escalated to a more intense discussion. Emily accused Michael of keeping her in the dark about his past relationships, especially about Victoria. Michael, in turn, argued that his personal life prior to their agreement shouldn't be relevant to the current situation. It was then that Emily realized how she had deluded herself. Michael was right to keep things at a professional level. She had allowed her feelings to develop beyond what was appropriate for the situation. Embarrassed by her emotional outburst, Emily apologized and withdrew to her room. Michael remained in the library, reflecting on the discussion. He had also noticed how his own feelings had evolved, but he had fought against them, fearing to expose himself again to the possibility of loss and pain. The prospect of opening his heart again terrified him. The next day, the atmosphere between them was heavy. Emily maintained a professional distance, being polite but cold. Michael, in turn, seemed divided between the desire to get closer and the need to maintain the barriers he had built around himself. It was during this period of tension that Emily received a notification that would completely change the course of her life. An email about an international call for scholarship applications in literature had arrived in her inbox. It was an opportunity she had dreamed of for years, a master's degree in comparative literature at a prestigious university in Europe. Emily read the email several times, feeling a mixture of hope and terror. It was exactly the type of opportunity she had always desired, but that Jason constantly discouraged, saying she should be more realistic about her capabilities and ambitions. She decided not to immediately tell Michael about the opportunity. First, she wanted to know if she really had a chance of being accepted before creating unnecessary expectations. During the following days, Emily secretly worked on her application, writing essays about her passion for literature and her future projects. Michael noticed that she was distant and more thoughtful than normal, but respected her space. He himself was dealing with his own internal issues, trying to decide if he should risk opening himself emotionally again. The moment of decision came when Emily finally gathered the courage to submit her application. She had written a passionate essay about how literature could be a bridge between cultures, inspired in part by her recent experiences at diplomatic events alongside Michael. That night, Emily finally told Michael about the opportunity. She explained that she had applied for a scholarship and that if accepted, she would need to travel to Europe for 2 years. Michael listened in silence, and Emily couldn't decipher his expression. Michael's reaction was unexpected. Instead of discouraging her or expressing concern about how this would affect their agreement, he congratulated her on the initiative and offered all the necessary help to strengthen her application. Emily was touched by his support, but also a little confused about what this meant for the relationship that had developed between them. In the following weeks, while they waited for the university's response, Emily and Michael found a new balance. They continued to fulfill their social commitments, but there was an underlying melancholy, as if both knew that a significant change was approaching. The acceptance letter arrived on a June morning. Emily found it in her email inbox as soon as she woke up, and for a moment couldn't believe what she was reading. She had been accepted with a full scholarship for the Masters in Comparative Literature at Oxford University. It was a dream she had secretly harbored for years, considering it impossible to achieve. Her hands trembled when she went downstairs to tell Michael. She found him in the office, as always, working even before breakfast. When Emily knocked on the door, he raised his eyes and immediately noticed her expression of excitement mixed with apprehension. Michael heard the news with a genuine smile, warmly congratulating her on the achievement. But Emily saw something in his eyes that contradicted his apparent joy, a deep sadness that he tried to hide. She knew that her departure would mean the end of an important phase in both their lives. During the following days, Michael was tireless in helping her with the preparations. He used his contacts to expedite the visa process, recommended lawyers specialized in international documentation, and even researched student accommodations in Oxford. Emily was touched by his dedication, but also intrigued by the intensity of his support. A week before her departure, Michael made a confession that changed everything. They were in the garden, on the same bench where he had spoken about Ethan months ago. The moon illuminated his face when he said, with a vulnerability that Emily had never seen before, that he loved her. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, but a calm and sincere admission. Michael explained that he had fought against his feelings for months, fearing to expose himself again to the possibility of loss. But the prospect of her leaving had made him realize that love, even with its risks, was worth more than a life of emotional protection. Emily felt her heart race. She had also fallen in love with Michael, but had suppressed her feelings because she believed they could never be reciprocated. Now, faced with his confession, she found herself in a dilemma she hadn't anticipated. Michael, as if reading her thoughts, reassured her. He said he loved her too much to ask her to give up on her dreams. On the contrary, he wanted her to go to Oxford, to live that experience, to discover herself away from the shadow of the humiliation she had suffered. If, after 2 years, she still wanted to return to him, he would be waiting. Emily cried that night, divided between the joy of knowing that her love was reciprocated and the pain of having to separate from him just when they had found each other. But deep down she knew that Michael was right. She needed this experience to become the woman she wanted to be. The departure was more difficult than Emily had imagined. Michael accompanied her to the airport, and they said goodbye with a kiss that carried all the intensity of their repressed feelings. He promised that he would write, and she promised that she would respond to all his letters. The first months at Oxford were challenging. Emily had to adapt to a new culture, a different educational system, and the loneliness of being far from everything she knew. But gradually she began to flourish. Her professors recognized her talent, her colleagues respected her opinions, and she discovered a confidence in herself that she had never experienced. Michael's letters arrived weekly, long handwritten texts where he told her about his day, about the projects he was working on, about how the house seemed empty without her presence. Emily kept each letter as a treasure, rereading them in moments of longing. She also wrote religiously, telling him about her academic discoveries, about the interesting people she met, about how she was growing as a person. She never mentioned other men, although there were some colleagues who showed interest in her. Her heart remained faithful to Michael, even with an ocean separating them. When she completed a year at Oxford, Emily received a different letter. Michael wrote that he was organizing a special event, a charity gala in memory of Ethan, to raise funds for a new children's library that would be built in his name. It was the first time he had mentioned his son since she had left. Emily understood the importance of that gesture. Michael was finally finding a way to honor Ethan's memory without allowing himself to be consumed by guilt. She felt proud to know that somehow she had contributed to his emotional healing. The second year at Oxford passed more quickly. Emily was completing her dissertation on the influence of Brazilian literature on world literature, a work that had been inspired by her conversations with Michael about cultural identity. She knew she was approaching the moment to decide about her future. The decision came naturally. Emily realized that despite having grown and developed during her stay in Europe, her heart remained in Chicago with Michael. She had become the woman she wanted to be, but now wanted to share this new version of herself with the man she loved. Emily decided to make a surprise. Instead of informing Michael about her decision to return, she simply showed up on the night of the charity gala. She had prepared carefully, wearing an elegant dress she had bought in London, and arrived at the event when it was already in full swing. When she entered the hall, Emily felt all eyes turn to her, but this time there was no malicious curiosity or judgment. There was recognition and respect. The woman who returned was different from the one who had left 2 years before. There was a confidence in her posture, a light in her eyes that didn't exist before. Michael was on stage, giving a speech about the importance of children's education when he saw her. For a moment, he lost his train of thought, clearly moved by her unexpected presence. Emily smiled encouragingly, and he regained his composure, finishing his speech with an eloquence that made her feel proud. When Michael came down from the stage, they met in the middle of the hall. He hugged her, and Emily felt that she was finally home. They talked briefly about her decision to return, and Michael confessed that he had waited for her every day for the past 2 years. It was then that Michael did something that surprised all those present. He knelt in the middle of the hall in front of hundreds of people and asked Emily to marry him. It wasn't a desperate or dramatic proposal, but a serene declaration from a man who had learned the value of true love. Emily accepted without hesitation, and the hall exploded in applause, but she barely heard the celebration around her. She was focused on the man in front of her, on the love she saw in his eyes, on the promise of a future built on solid foundations of mutual respect and personal growth. Among the guests, Emily noticed Jason and Megan, who observed the scene with complex expressions. Megan was holding a child in her arms, and Jason seemed older and more tired than she remembered. Emily didn't feel anger or bitterness seeing them. On the contrary, she felt a strange form of gratitude. If it weren't for the humiliation they had caused, she would never have met Michael, never would have discovered her own strength. Later, when the event was ending and they could finally be alone, Michael took Emily to the garden of the house. They sat on the same bench where they had shared their first confidences, where he had talked about Ethan, where he had confessed his love. Michael said that if Ethan were there, he would approve of his choice. Emily was moved to realize that he had finally found peace with his loss. She promised that she would honor the boy's memory, not trying to replace him, but creating a new chapter in their lives. When they looked at the starry sky, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought them there. It had begun with humiliation and pain, but had transformed into growth and true love. She understood that sometimes it's necessary to fall completely to discover who we really are and what we really value. Michael took her hand and said that he wanted her to continue writing, that her academic dreams didn't need to be abandoned because of the marriage. Emily smiled, knowing that she had found not just a companion but a partner who would support her in all her ambitions. They stayed there until late, planning the future, talking about the children they might have one day, about the projects they would develop together. Emily knew it wouldn't be an easy journey, but she also knew that they had a solid foundation to build a life together. At the end of that magical night, when they finally got up to enter the house, Emily looked once more at the stars. She had learned that a happy ending is not a destination, but a daily choice. It's the decision to love despite the risks, to grow despite the pain, to rebuild despite the falls. The woman who had been left at the altar no longer existed. In her place was a strong, fulfilled woman who was deeply loved. Emily knew that her true life was just beginning, and she was ready to embrace every moment of it, alongside the man who had learned to love not only for his strength, but also for his vulnerability. When they entered the house, Emily saw that the door to Ethan's room was open. Michael explained that he had decided to transform the space into a library for underprivileged children, a way to honor his son's memory while helping other children. Emily smiled, knowing that this gesture symbolized the complete healing of both. That night, sleeping for the first time in 2 years in Michael's arms, Emily dreamed of the future. She dreamed of children laughing in the library they would build, of books she would write, of love that would continue to grow each day. She had finally found her place in the world, and that place was beside the man who had taught her that true love isn't about not falling, but about getting up together each time life knocks us down. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and Michael's story has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative of overcoming, true love, and new beginnings teaches us that even in the darkest moments of our lives, there is always an opportunity for rebirth. To continue this emotional journey with us, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating and inspiring stories. You can find it by clicking here on your left. If this story moved you as much as we hoped, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give that thumbs up to the video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships and the strength of the human heart. Don't miss our upcoming content, as each story is a new opportunity to be moved and reflect on life. We're waiting for you in the comments. We want to know what you thought of Emily and Michael's journey.